Welcome back everyone to another NASCAR Heat Evolution setup video. In this video, we'll be taking a look at Martinsville. And I got to tell you at the very beginning, this is the track that I've struggled with the most out of any track so far doing these setups. In fact, I was unable to quite get to the 105 rating. But before we get into the setup itself, let's take a look at some lap times. Now at Martinsville, on max difficulty, which is 105% AI, the AI will qualify at about a 19.1 second lap. And race pace, the quickest lap I've seen is about a 19.4, 19.5 roughly. And again, that's the quickest lap the AI run during the race. The issue I have is I can run with them at max difficulty, but lap in, lap out, I cannot get down. I can't make that fast lap. So what I decided to do, instead of continually trying to chase that, because I could quickly tell I was going to get nowhere near 19.1, but instead of trying to chase that 19.4 fast lap, I decided to try to make a setup that would be good and stable, a setup that you could run a race against the AI with and know that every time you go into the corner, the car is going to be underneath you, and the same thing coming off the corner, the car will stay underneath you rather than you having to fight this thing running left and right, and the car being all over the place. So with that being said, my lap times are anywhere from a 19.5 to a 19.6, just depending on how well I run the track. This track is very line sensitive and very spot sensitive, meaning that you need to hit your marks or your spots on corner entry and corner exit. You need to be very precise about when you're on the brakes, how hard you're on the brakes, when you're on the gas, and how hard you're on the gas. Now, I'll tell you that I've constructed this setup so that you can get on the gas very hard coming off the corner. However, before you can get there, you got to get into the corner well. And the deeper you drive it into the corner, the harder it is to get the car to turn in the center of the corner so you can get a good run off. So I find that I try to back up the corner a little bit, get on the brakes a little bit earlier, maybe not quite as hard. That way I can keep the car on the bottom, keep the car from getting loose on me so that the car will feel free enough to rotate, but then allow me to really get to the throttle hard coming off. The reason for that, as well as the stability part of it, is you're going to pass cars here from the center of the corner off. Because the way you're going to do it is you're going to get back to the gas harder or earlier in the center of the corner and then simply beat them down to the next entry of the corner. So if you can get off the corner better than them, you can get to their inside and then be on their inside when you get to the next corner entry, and then hopefully clear them on the next straightaway. So that's the mindset you have to have. It's not necessarily dive bombing and driving it in as deep as you can in the corner. It's more about corner exit and beating them into the next corner. So let's go ahead and take a look at the setup itself. We'll skip over the shocks. As always, they're at 10 all around. Weight settings, 54.2%, which is the max because we are on an oval and we're turning left all the time. Front weight is at 50.2%. This is something that you can play around with. I played around a little bit with it, but it started to make the car a little bit too loose, so I left it at 50.2. If the car is not rotating, this is something that you can lower this setting, get it at 50%, maybe even less, and it would definitely help the car to rotate quicker. If the car is getting too loose with you, the car is rotating too much, particularly in the center of the corner, then you can raise that number up toward 50.5 or even higher if need be. Wedge, I tested out numbers above and below the 50%, decided on the 50% just for stability purposes. If you lower this number into the 49s, 49.5 for example, the car will definitely rotate more through the center of the corner and on exit. However, it borderlines getting too loose, particularly on exit, so I shied away from going any lower than 50.0. Front and rear ride heights are at the minimums as normal. Moving over to the spring settings, the front springs are both at 1,100 pounds. The reason for this is under heavy braking, I find that the closer I have the front springs to being equal, then the more stable the car is under heavy braking. So I decided to leave them, instead of using my normal split of a stiffer left front than right front, I decided to make them equal so that you could really get hard on the brakes getting into the corner without having to worry about the car jumping sideways on you. Rear springs, I'm running 200 pounds of rear split with a 300-pound left rear, 500-pound right rear. Again, this is something you can experiment with and actually get the car to turn better coming off the corner if need be by reducing the amount of left rear spring or increasing the amount of right rear spring. 200 pounds seemed to work pretty good to allow the car to turn, particularly on corner exit, without getting it too loose. Next up are the tire pressure settings, and this is something that I think has a lot of variability, and it has quickly become one of my favorite adjustments for the car. In this case, I'm using 15 pounds of split between the left and right by going with a 10-pound, which is the minimum left side pressure, and 25-pound right side pressure. Now, thinking about why you would want to do that, the more split you run between left and right, the more the car will rotate in the corner. Now, obviously, at a track like Martinsville, there's a balance there because we want the car to rotate very quickly through these tight corners, but at the same time, we don't want the car to get loose, particularly on exit, because then we lose all of our speed and are probably going to get passed by multiple cars before we get to the next corner. So I settled on 15 pounds of split because that seemed to give me the best of ability to turn while keeping the car from getting too terribly loose. But I would definitely recommend you to play around with these numbers. Feel free to try more or less split in the tire pressures. For instance, if you're finding that the car is just getting too loose on you in the corners, try reducing that split to something like 5 or 10 pounds and see how that changes the handling of the car, and then you can adjust from there. Moving over to the miscellaneous settings, both the left front and right front cambers are maxed out at -10. As I've mentioned in the past, this will make the car turn very hard to the left on the straightaway. So if you're having trouble with that, particularly if you're having trouble with handling the car on the straightaway and it seems to be pulling way too hard to the left, then by all means reduce that camber number. You should be okay as far as speed, but it will particularly help you on the straightaway if that's a problem area for you. Front sway bar is another area that you can get a lot of adjustability in the car. I've chosen to stay with the 1.5 inch, although if you lower that number, then the car will definitely rotate better for you through the corner. If the car is too loose, you can raise this number and add some more stability. The car will be a little tighter. Skipping past the rear sway bar, moving on to the left and right track bar settings. You can see here that I'm using a reverse split, meaning that the left side is higher than the right side of 2 inches. What this does is allows the car to get into the corner very aggressively and rotate without getting too loose on exit. Anytime you use a higher left than right side number, you're going to help the car to be a little bit tighter on exit. It gives the car a little bit of extra bite coming off the corner, which I really like. Brake bias, I settled on 72. If the car is too loose for you under braking, feel free to increase that number. If the car is getting way too tight and you simply can't get the car to turn on entry, then you can lower that number. Grill tape, as usual, is at 0%. Wheel lock has not been touched, and steering offset is at my normal 0.125, as I figure that's about the best compromise for me in the car pulling to the left on the straightaway. Now, as normal, if you find that the car is pulling too hard to the left on the straightaway, then in addition to the camber settings that you can adjust, as I mentioned earlier, you can also try increasing the steering offset, and that should help some with the pull to the left. Moving on to the gearing, the rear end ratio I settled on 5.29 simply because that's what basically gives me 9,000 RPMs at the end of the straightaway. So at this particular track, I wanted to stay with that setting. If I drop down too much and get closer to 5 or even below for a rear end ratio, then I find that the car really bogs down coming off the corner. You need all the RPMs you can get, particularly coming off the corner, and the 5.29 was the best compromise for that. Hope you guys have enjoyed the video. I've got basically a lap and a half coming up for you to show you examples. The first lap is a 19.6. The second lap dips down into the 19.5s and just gives you an example of how I run the track. There's definitely room for improvement, and I think that a 105 AI setting is possible for me to get a faster lap time. It seems like you need to be around a 19.4, maybe a 19.3 to get that 105 rating, and it's there. It's just I can't quite seem to get there from a fast lap perspective, but I have no doubts that you can run a competitive lap against the AI at 105 difficulty. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be back later with more NASCAR Heat Evolution.
That was a great lap.